Many people, myself included, have been working from home since the pandemic started and will continue to work remotely, relying on video conferencing platforms like Zoom to meet with their teams. And there are a lot of great things about virtual meetings, like wearing pajama pants and having your pet lounge at your feet, but almost half of people who transition to the home office life say that they miss in-person meetings. One explanation is that technology can lead to different communication barriers and makes it harder to pick up on things like social cues and body language. So maybe you find yourself playing it safe and staying mostly muted on your calls, which feels less intimidating but will likely have negative impacts on your career and beyond. So in this workshop, we are going to dive into strategies for speaking up and elevating your presence in virtual meetings so that you can contribute confidently and communicate effectively. Back by popular demand, I have Emily Aries here with me. Emily is a speaker, podcast host, author, and the founder and CEO of Bossed Up, an award-winning personal and professional development community where she helps women craft happy, healthy, and sustainable career paths. And that's me, Brandy Warwis. I'm on Indeed's Job Seeker Experience team, and we're responsible for creating helpful resources and events like this Jobcast for our users, like you. Take it away, Emily.
Thanks so much, Brandy. It is great to be with everyone. I am tuning in from Denver, Colorado, where Bossed Up is headquartered, and I'm joined here today by two of my fantastic colleagues, Kirby and Ellie, who are going to be chiming in chat along with so many of you. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us and really work on making your voice heard. I'm Emily Aries, an author, speaker, podcaster, and I am familiar with the challenges, the risks, and the rewards of speaking up and making your voice heard. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic with you today. Now, regardless of gender, we're going to talk all about how making your voice heard is a beneficial move for your career. So let's dive right in and start by acknowledging that the art of communication isn't just about knowing what to say and how to say it, but also knowing when to speak up. Virtual workplace environments, which many of us find ourselves in now, have made this question of timing extra tricky. If you have had 1,000,001 Zoom meetings or Teams meetings or virtual conversations with colleagues, it can take extra effort nowadays to decide when the risks are outweighed by the reward of speaking up and how to strategically insert yourself into conversation in a way that feels both respectful but also unapologetically assertive. So that's really what I want to talk about with us today and share some practical, tactical strategies and tips that you can put into effect right away. And as Brandy mentioned, I've joined Indeed here before on quite a few Jobcasts that are very related. So if you like what you hear today, make sure to go check out the rest of Indeed's incredible Jobcasts available on Indeed's website. So why should you even bother in speaking up? Why is it so important to make our voices heard, especially in virtual work environments? Well, silence says more than we think it does. Oftentimes, our silence can be misconstrued as implicit acceptance. It's deemed as approval. That means if you say nothing, we're going to assume that you're on board with this. And that we are going to assume that you're just getting on the bandwagon with the rest of us, right? It also is important to acknowledge that sometimes we have to speak up on behalf of the greater good. We have to speak up on behalf of the people who aren't in the room having this conversation. We've got to demonstrate that we care enough to speak up. It's one thing if you're totally burnt out and checked out, but sitting back and saying nothing doesn't really read as someone who's invested, who's interested, who's curious, who's contributing. It's also a great reminder to acknowledge that if you've got a question and you're afraid of asking it, odds are there are other people in the room, either there in that meeting or in the larger communication or community, that have the same question too. So don't be afraid to speak up and ask a question, because you're probably not alone in thinking it. Now, why is it so hard for us to speak up despite these benefits? I would ask you to really reflect on this question. How have you been hushed? Over the course of a lifetime, we go from being unabashed, unafraid, unashamed, rambunctious little ones. I'm especially thinking of this as I'm in my 3rd trimester of my first pregnancy at the moment, and there's a rambunctious little one on its way into my life in the very near future. But as kids, we were not afraid to scream at the top of our lungs. As kids, we were not afraid to ask questions. As kids, probably asking too many questions for some of the adults around us. And so many of us had no qualms, no self-doubt when it came to speaking up and making our voices heard. That's why the show Kids Say the Darndest Things is such a hit, right? But over time, so many of us receive messages that tell us to pipe down, to sit back, to say less. And I want to ask you in particular if you feel any kind of way about the sound of your voice in particular. Over the course of our lifetimes, our own self-image shifts. We become more full of self-doubt or more self-critical. As an example, how much do you enjoy listening to yourself on a recording? Watching yourself play back a video of you giving a presentation? How about listening to your own outgoing voicemail message on your cell phone? How many of us even have an outgoing voicemail message on our cell phone? I'm seeing a lot of comments saying, no, thank you, 0%. I sound like a little kid. It's awful. I do not like to hear my voice. Those are judgments that we gather over time. We did not at one point feel that way about ourselves. Those are thoughts, insecurities, criticisms that we pick up on over a lifetime of sometimes very unsolicited feedback that we get from people. And for women especially, there is a long history of women being associated with silence in particular. There's a pretty long history with even biblical references and Aristotle saying that silence is a woman's glory. So if you find it difficult because you feel like over time you've been positively or negatively reinforced to stay quiet, maybe from a teacher who praised you as a little girl for sitting there quietly with your ankles crossed and your hands crossed across your lap, like my grandmother used to tell me in church, right? On Easter Sunday with my little white lace gloves as a little kid to just sit there and be quiet and be still. Or you've been given negative reinforcement in the form of saying, don't be so bossy, don't be so shrill, don't be so harsh, right? Both in positive and negative ways, society tends to teach girls and women in particular to shrink ourselves. And this phenomenon is as true today as it's ever been. Just last year, there was a headline in the New York Times, maybe you saw it, that said, it's not just you. In online meetings, many women feel like they can't get a word in. Now, whether you identify as a woman or not, so many of us have trouble speaking up and making our voices heard. This is not just a women's issue. I want to make that very clear, right? So there's lots of us, whether you identify as an introvert or you just feel like you're the newest person at work, or perhaps you feel othered in some other way based on your race, your sexual orientation, ability, you name it. There are many ways in which folks who feel like a minority in a majority environment feel especially hesitant about speaking up and making our voices heard. And this is often a realistic fear, right? This is not a fear grounded in nothing. It's often a fear grounded in the very real benefit versus cost calculation that we're making in our heads at all given times. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had something important to say, but you did not say it? You decided not to say it. Why did that happen? If you've ever had something important to say, but you didn't say it, why did that happen? I'm all the time. I'm shy, fear, lots of fear, shyness, intimidated, being judged, second guessing myself. I thought it wouldn't matter, pressure, embarrassment, being shut down, right? Overthinking. There is a ton of very real risk in making our voices heard that we have to weigh against the benefits. But here's the problem. If this becomes a habit, if speaking up or rather not speaking up and saying nothing out of fear, out of habit, out of insecurity, out of a fear of repercussions becomes the default decision that you're making every time instead of a conscious, mindful choice that you're making, then we can all become victims of groupthink, right? Who here has ever been in a workplace where maybe the boss would ask a question of the staff and everyone just goes, "Great idea." Let's make it happen, right? That is oftentimes how we get really bad products in the marketplace, or how advertisements go out the door with everyone's thumbs up until there's a huge cultural backlash saying, how the heck did this get approved? Who signed off on this, right? There's a real phenomenon in psychology known as bandwagon bias. Bandwagon bias is our propensity as human beings to just go along to get along, to believe in something because other people believe in it. It's kind of like when you're in a meeting and you say, well, I guess if everyone else thinks that this is okay, I shouldn't say anything, even though I think it's wrong. So it is a very powerful force of human nature to know that we are all up against groupthink and that speaking up is such an important way to disrupt groupthink and make sure that we're making the best decisions overall for our teams, for our communities, for our organizations, for our families, and for ourselves. Because if we default to groupthink, it can become an unconscious habit over time. Scientists and sociologists call this habit loss of voice, and it tends to emerge predominantly amongst women starting in adolescence. Research actually shows that in college, over the course of 4 years at a university, women leave college feeling and reporting feelings of less confidence in their ability to speak up than when they begin college. Young men, on the other hand, experience the opposite. They go into college saying, on the whole, I don't feel super confident about my ability to speak up. And then that confidence increases over time. So there really do begin to be marked gender differences in loss of voice right around adolescence, which is something for us to watch out for, because self-silencing is something that only you can begin to unpack. So if you found yourself feeling like, I used to be really outspoken, I used to feel more confident, but in recent years that's changed, we really need to take a moment to unpack how that came to be and how we can begin to reverse that trend. Because I'm here to tell you the benefits to your career, not to mention to your organization overall, beg the question, why not me? Why shouldn't I be the one to make my voice heard?
Emily, that is just so true. And I was talking to my sister about it actually, because she recently did an executive coaching program where she had to post a video about her fears on Facebook. And she spoke about being the only kid in class who always had questions about the assignment, hand always in the air. And it still haunts her in meetings when she feels like she needs to ask a clarifying question. And all this time, she felt like she was the only one who needed those answers, yet people she hasn't spoken to since high school commented on her video saying how much they relied on her asking those questions because they had the same ones, but were just too shy to speak up. And so without even realizing it, my sister positioned herself as a leader for those classmates by asking those questions.
Wow, what a powerful example. It's funny how, even a little bit of feedback early on in our lives can stick with us, and we can create this narrative of who we think we are and how we think we're being perceived. What a powerful moment to hear from your former classmates who we probably haven't talked to in a while, that maybe our sense of self isn't all that it is, right? Maybe there's more to it. So I see so many people here in the chat relating to how this can be challenging, again, across the gender spectrum for all kinds of folks. And so today we're going to really break down how we can speak up, not just why it's important, but how we can speak up in a way that is strategic, thoughtful, kind, and assertive. Before we go further, though, I do want to pause to ask for some feedback in the form of a poll. We're going to launch these 3 polls together to really encourage you to reflect on what's holding you back from speaking up more. These are 3 multiple choice questions that you can fill out in the poll here all together, and then we'll go ahead and take a moment to reflect. So, what's holding you back from speaking up more? Feel free to select all that apply. Perhaps you used to speak up more, but you lost your confidence over time. Perhaps it doesn't feel safe to speak up at your workplace, or you feel like an imposter. I hear from countless clients and community members at Bossed Up who feel traumatized from past workplaces or bosses who made it unsafe to speak up. Maybe you feel nervous, can't find the words, don't know how to balance being assertive with being kind, feel like your contributions aren't important, or maybe you're the kind of person who speaks up very easily, very candidly, without fully thinking things through first. Perhaps you feel like your contributions aren't appreciated, or perhaps you actually feel like you speak up too much. My second question is, have you ever been given feedback about how you speak up from a boss, colleague, former teacher, friend, loved one? Have you been told you're too quiet, too outspoken, that you need to work on your approach, or have you not received feedback on this? And finally, I really want you to reflect on this in your poll questions or your poll responses here. What would becoming a more effective communicator mean for your career? Would you be a better presenter, get your points across better, get more recognition, promotions, be more comfortable thinking on your feet, be less flustered, get better pay, be taken more seriously? Or are you not sure, or do you have or you don't think it would have any impact on your career? Go ahead and take a moment to fill out these polls. All right. So let's take a look. One of the highest vote getters for what's holding you back from speaking up more is just feeling so nervous that you can't find the words. That related to 36% of us. Similarly, 37% of us said, I feel like my contributions aren't appreciated. Absolutely. This can speak to the environments that we find ourselves in, right? The environment shapes our behavior. So whether you're on a team that makes us feel like our contributions aren't appreciated, or that's a way to describe your home life or your community overall, that is absolutely going to impact whether you think it's worth it to even attempt to speak up. And if you're so nervous that you can't find the words, we're going to talk through how to practice that further. Have you ever been given feedback about how you speak up? 36% of us said, yep, I've been told that I'm too quiet. And a whopping 40% of us, the highest percentage, said that you haven't received feedback on this, to which I say, congratulations. That is great. It's not the majority of us, but it's helpful when people aren't giving unsolicited thoughts and feedback on your speech, because it can just feed into a sense of self-criticism. So 36% of you have been told you're too quiet, 13% of you have been told you're too outspoken, and 21% of us have been told that you need to work on your approach. A lot of folks who come to our programs at Bossed Up, especially as it relates to being a more confident, cogent, and assertive communicator, come to us because their boss or colleagues have given them feedback saying, we want you to work on this. It is a real professional development opportunity. It's a real skill that is important in the workplace today. And it looks like we all agree with that because we got a lot of votes here in the third poll saying that 56% of us feel like we'd be better able to get our points across in meetings. 47% of us would feel more comfortable thinking on our feet. And only 5% of us think that it wouldn't have any impact on our career. So I think we see the value, Brandy, right, in making improvements, in making strides, in becoming a more cogent and concise and confident communicator, which, like all soft skills, can be worked on. This is something that can be developed. So if you feel like it's part of your identity that you're soft-spoken or that you're introverted or that you are just a quiet person, let me reinforce the idea that this is an opportunity for growth for all of us, okay? This is an opportunity for us to flex our skills and try some new tools out. So what I want to give to you is a set of communication tools to add to your overall communication toolbox. And I know there's so many of us here today. There's so many folks who have different purposes, different roles in different workplaces that I want to keep in mind there's no one right way to communicate. Okay? This is not the one and only way to speak up. These are simply tools to add to your overall communications toolbox that you get to decide when you're going to reach for that tool. For some projects, the hammer is the right tool. For other projects, you're going to need a wrench. I'm not here to tell you when to grab the wrench or when to grab the hammer, but I am here to equip you with some new options to add to your overall toolbox of communication options so that you can make the right call when it's worth it to make your voice heard and how you can speak up without apology. So first, let's talk about interruption. Interruption is a bit of a dirty word. How do you feel about the idea of speaking up to interrupt someone else, right? Most of us have been told, no, interruption is a bad thing, not to make our voice heard in such a way, that it's rude. We bring all kinds of negative connotations to interruption. However, I would argue that if you gave me a transcript of the last phone call that you had with your best friend, your daughter, your mother, your dad, someone with whom you feel very close or you have a very friendly relationship, I would venture to guess that you were completing each other's sentences. Guess what that's called? Interrupting. With the people we feel most comfortable, most close to, we interrupt those folks all the time, sometimes to a fault, because in my household, it was very culturally common for us to speak over one another to a fault. But like you're saying here in chat, Linda just said, interruptions are normal with our safe circle, and that's absolutely true. However, interruptions can also be leveraged professionally when it serves the goals of the conversation. Who here has ever, for example, been sitting in a meeting as you've watched the meeting go completely off the rails? One person has just bogarted the floor, has just taken over the meeting. You've got 5 minutes left before everyone has to part ways. And you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, please someone speak up and take the reins, take control back, right? I am here to tell you that there is a time and a place for strategic interruption leveraged professionally for the good of the overall community. So how can we do that? There are 3 tactics for strategically speaking up and interrupting that I want to share with you today. The first 2 come out of a great book called Outspoken: Why Women's Voices Get Silenced and How to Set Them Free by Veronica Reckert that I highly recommend checking out. So the first is called the blade. Now, the blade is a tactic that's all about creating what Veronica Reckert calls an audio wedge, which is a little verbal insertion where you can really create a moment to kind of wedge your voice into the overall conversation. It's a 3-step process that starts with active listening. Okay, so you want to listen. Let's say that there's a boss or a speaker who's been dominating the conversation. You want to listen actively to think, when is that person speaking, taking a breath? When are they pausing between different thoughts? Get a sense of their timing. It's kind of like listening to the double dutch ropes if you've ever jumped in to play double dutch. So you can start to really get a sense of pacing. Then, using a phrase like, I'm going to jump in here, pick your moment around one of those pauses to jump in and say, I'm going to jump in here quickly, crisply, and with increasing volume if necessary. Once you've created that audio wedge, you've sliced into the conversation using the blade, don't stop until you've gotten your point across, right? You're in, run with it, right? Run with it until you've made your point. So feel free to leverage the blade when it comes to jumping in.
And Emily, I'm going to jump in there actually and just give a few more phrases that you can use. Could be before we continue, or one additional thought, or even that's an interesting point. And then you continue your own point after that. So just a couple of things or different phrases to mix it up.
I love it, Brandy. What a great demonstration of the blade in real time, too. It's such a good thing to think about that you can make this tactic your own. So find the phrasing that works for you. Someone here in chat brought up a good point, though. One phrase I would encourage you to opt out of using is sorry. As much as we commonly use sorry from a habitual standpoint to speak up, sorry gets confused for an apology, when oftentimes the data on sorry shows that women tend to use the word sorry more often as an empathizer, saying, I'm so sorry that's happening to you, to demonstrate that we feel what you're feeling. Whereas men tend to read, and these are, of course, gender generalizations from the data, but men tend to use the word sorry to say, I am apologizing for something. Because it is confused for an apology when it might be used as an empathizing phrase, I encourage you to not use the word sorry as a blade, as an audio wedge, because it can in some ways qualify what you're about to say. So there's lots of other ways to think about how you can jump in and speak up, saying, I want to add something here, or before we move forward, like you said, Brandy, which are great without the confusing connotation of an apology. Again, we're speaking in terms that apply to everyone across the gender spectrum here, but there are interesting gender differences in the research. So I like to bring that element to everything I do here as well. A similar tactic that comes straight out of Veronica Ruckert's excellent book on this is what she calls the broken record. It's similar in that you're using an audio wedge to insert your voice into conversation, but you pick an even shorter phrase. So instead of I'm gonna jump in here, you're just gonna pick I'm gonna, or some abbreviated version. Again, you're gonna wanna listen carefully to the timing to find your moment. And then when you speak up, you're going to speak up with repetition. I'm gonna jump in here with increasing volume and urgency. The reason that this can be important is that the first attempt might not be enough, especially if you're trying to insert yourself into a conversation where someone has been really dominating the floor the entire time. So you might need a little bit of repetition going. Has anyone here ever tried to speak up and nobody heard you? This is the antidote to that problem. So if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? With increasing volume and urgency. This is especially important on platforms like Zoom, where we are right now, because a lot of our digital meeting software has learned to recognize the difference between someone speaking up and contributing to the conversation versus me dropping a pen on my desk over here, or versus a door slamming behind me. And what Zoom and many other software is designed to do is to ignore the pen drop, to ignore the door slam. So they're not going to mic you up unless they know you're a human being contributing to conversation. So sometimes you need to show the software, the robotic software, that I'm not just a door slamming, right? By continuing to speak up with repetition if necessary. Once again, once you're in, you're in. Don't stop until you've gotten your point across. And my final spin on Veronica's excellent advice in her book is to use the speaker's name. This is an Emily Aries original, and I personally have used this tactic 1,000,001 times. You've probably heard me do it already today, saying, Brandy, that's an excellent point. Just as a way to say, we all know people like the sound of their own name. So if you've got a boss or a colleague who's taken over a meeting or who you want to contribute to, who seems to be owning the floor a bit, you can use their name by saying, Brandy, that's such a great point. I want to add to that here before we move on. And it works like a charm. It's a respectful, almost flattering version of an interruption that I highly recommend. So you want to identify the speaker by name, repeat if necessary, and then to really seal the deal, state your collective intention. Like, Brandy, I want to make sure that we hear from everyone here today. And I know that Sandra worked really closely with the client on this. Sandra, what do you have to say about this? So using the speaker's name can be a really helpful way to not only interrupt, but then seal the deal with a collective intention. Can you all imagine yourselves using one or more of these tactics to strategically interrupt at work? All right, I'm seeing a lot of yeses in chat. So glad to hear this is helpful. Let me remind you, if this feels uncomfortable because you haven't used them before, there's a bit of a learning curve here. So give yourself a challenge that sometime this week, I want you to use the blade or use the speaker's name or use the broken record technique to give it a try. Now, that's kind of the offense version. I don't know if anyone here played sports, but that's the offense for speaking up. Let's talk about defense for holding the floor, right? So how can you maintain the floor, meaning continue to make your voice heard when other people are using the broken record or are using the blade or using the speaker's name to interrupt you? Here are 3 more tactics I want you to keep in mind as a way to maintain your composure to get your point across. Anyone here been interrupted chronically at work or find that other people are speaking over you? These are going to help you prevent that from continuing to happen. All right, the first is what Veronica calls the snapback. Now, despite the name, I do not actually recommend snapping because that can sometimes be misconstrued. But the snapback is a way of physically demonstrating that you're not done yet, meaning holding up a finger or holding up an open palm to visibly, with body language, demonstrate that you're not finished making your point. Now, this means that we're assuming you're either in person at a meeting or you're on a meeting that's a video meeting like this one. This was not going to work for you on a conference call. So yes, it's a little sassy for sure. But what we're going to do here is use that physicality of your body language to say, I want to finish this thought before we continue. And literally just visibly reinforce with your hand, with your body language, leaning forward, holding up a finger or palm to say, I want to finish this thought before we move on. Now, this final part of the snapback is by far the most important. Do not make lasting eye contact if you're in person, or do not make lasting verbal acknowledgement of the interrupter. Here's why. If you're sitting in a conference room and everyone's looking at you as you're contributing and you're making a point, and then someone over here interrupts you and says, Emily, I want to jump in here. If I go, let me finish my point, Tom, everyone who's been looking at me is going to look wherever I look. So if I maintain eye contact, sorry for the puppet show here, but if I maintain eye contact with the interrupter, everyone who was looking at me is all of a sudden going to be maintaining eye contact with our interrupter here, okay? So you, as the speaker, redirect people's eye contact. So when you snap back quickly, and then go back to addressing the rest of the room. Now, this is less salient for the virtual workplace, but it's an important point to recognize that, let's say Brandy speaks up to interrupt me. I'm not going to keep talking to Brandy and say, Brandy, that's a great point, Brandy, if you'll allow me to finish, Brandy. I'm not going to maintain the conversation as a sidebar. We've got to go back to addressing the overall community. Similarly, and this is by far more daunting, but if you are navigating a workplace with a chronic interrupter, this is a technique that I encourage you to call upon in case of public speaking emergency. So you'll see this happen with hecklers. You'll see this happen with keynote speakers who find that they're being chronically interrupted, and you can absolutely put this technique to work for you as well. This technique is called boardroom chicken, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a little bit of a game of chicken where you just keep talking despite someone else interrupting you. You raise your volume and you do not yield the floor. Has anyone ever played this game? It's a scary one. It can be nerve-wracking. It can certainly get your heart pumping. It can get your palms a little sweaty. But let me tell you, what you're essentially doing in that moment is you're creating a mindful moment of awareness for the interrupter to recognize that they interrupted you and you are not done making your point. And you're right, it doesn't always work. It can sound a little passive aggressive, and it is a little passive aggressive if you think about it. You're just ignoring this person from interrupting you. But if you find yourself chronically interrupted by a heckler, by someone who's taking the floor from you, who's being rude, quite frankly, to you, this is a coping mechanism that absolutely can work. So it depends on the situation. Like I said, these are tools to add to your communication toolbox, but I want you to know that's a very real thing that so many folks are called upon to have to play this game of boardroom chicken in order to be heard in the workplace. And finally, for chronic interrupters for whom boardroom chicken doesn't work, simply stating the facts of, I'm speaking, you've interrupted me, if I may finish. And we see this, I'm speaking, or I'm not finished making my point, or you've interrupted me. This is a statement of fact. You've seen this play out in the political stage. You've seen this play out in debates, right? We've seen this play out in the workplace as well. And in case it's necessary, if you are dealing with a chronic interrupter, stating the facts that you are not finished speaking is absolutely something that is well within your rights to do. Is it difficult? Yes. Are there power dynamics at play? Always. But you are the only person who can decide when and if it's worth it to lay down the hammer in this way. And once again, the book that this is all coming from, or some of these techniques rather, are coming from, is Veronica Reckert's great book, Outspoken: Why Women's Voices Get Silenced and How to Set Them Free. Now, if you feel nervous about putting these skills into use, you're not alone. A lot of us said that the reason we stay quiet is because we feel so nervous we can't find the words. The goal with these tactics is to give you just the starting block to find the words so that you can begin to take your voice back and make your contributions. No matter how imperfectly they come out, half of the battle is just maintaining the floor or jumping in. So once you've jumped in, and if I want to give you some tactics for how to keep your cool, how to maintain your composure as we put these new tactics into play. The first is physically reclaiming your space. Perhaps you've seen the research from Amy Cuddy et al., who shows that taking up more space with a power pose, like the Wonder Woman or the CEO power pose, can literally send a message from your body to your mind saying, I feel more confident because I'm looking more confident. And similarly, by taking up more space, you're sending a message in other people's minds that, hey, she looks pretty confident. I think she should continue, right? So it sends a message both internally and externally. Similarly, there's something in the research called the facial feedback loop that shows real data and evidence shows even if you plaster a fake smile on your face, people report feeling happier. People report feeling more comfortable and more confident. So if you're going into a job interview and you're really nervous and this is how your face kind of defaults to, even just reminding yourself to smile, maybe putting a little sticky note on your webcam to put a little smiley face there to remind you to plaster on a smile can literally make you feel more comfortable and help you keep your cool. Some hilarious research related to this actually shows that people with Botox injections who can't make frowny faces report feelings of increased happiness because some researchers theorize that they can't make a frowny face, so they feel less negative emotions. So however you want to interpret the research, smile your way through it still holds up. I think our parents were onto something when they told us to just smile to get through that nerve-wracking dance recital or whatever it was for you. And finally, something that as a third trimester pregnant person, I need to constantly remind myself of as my lung capacity gets a little more squished over here, is to breathe. When we breathe, we trigger our parasympathetic nervous system that tells us all is not lost, calms us back down. It reminds us that we are surviving. It reminds us that we are safe. So when you feel nervous, reclaim your space, put a smile on your face, take a deep breath, and keep going. My favorite way of navigating when you're making a point and you're not quite sure how to keep yourself from meandering or babbling because of nerves is to remember, proclaim, then explain. Speak up as you need to using any of those interruption tactics that we talked about, and just state your main point. Really? I disagree. Or really? I think we're headed in the wrong direction on this. Or I would add to that I think we're headed in the right direction on this. Whatever your main thesis statement is, lead with that. Then add evidence to back up your claim. Here's why I believe that. I was speaking with the client just yesterday, and here's a story backing up my claim, right? So this is where you can add evidence saying the study I read yesterday showed this, or share a story that backs up your claim. And then if you find yourself meandering, if you find yourself babbling a little bit, if you're the kind of person who needs to work on being more concise, always a great option is always just to go back and anchor to your main point, right? So if you say, really, I disagree. Here's a study that showed different results, or here's a story that explains why I disagree, and that is why I disagree. That's a wonderful way to close. Another common best practice for how to close with confidence is to open the floor back up to someone else and say, Brandy, what do you think about this? I know you worked closely with the client on that. Or ask an open-ended question like, does anyone else feel concerned about moving forward with this product? Those kinds of open-ended questions are another great way to close. So keep in mind, whether you're speaking up virtually or in person, once you've gotten the floor, this is a helpful tactic to really make the most of making your voice heard. Now, virtual meetings, which I know have made things even more tricky, can certainly be nerve-wracking. Some of my favorite best practices to keep in mind for the virtual meeting environment in particular is to remember that we're making eye contact with our little cameras, not with our colleagues' cameras, which can be very confusing, I know. My favorite best practice that I already mentioned is to put a little sticky note right up there with a smiley face so you can remember to maintain eye contact there when it matters most. You also want to make sure that you're maintaining a strong voice. Like I mentioned earlier, the software that we're using for these meetings has been designed to ignore the sporadic sound. And even there's been some interesting research that's come out lately showing that higher pitched voices are not as recognized. And so, of course, there are gender ramifications for that, right? Higher pitched voices don't often get recognized as voices that get mic'd up using virtual meeting software. So maintaining a strong voice is really, really important depending on your connection, depending on the software that you're using. Framing yourself wisely is always something to think about. Brandy's got an excellent little background on display for us today, showing her personality. I like to put my book here in case you can see it. It's a little bit small in the background today, but some plants, thinking a little bit about lighting and background can certainly be helpful to not distract from what you're saying. And then finally, being present and mindful. We can all be our own worst enemies when it comes to distraction, especially with the sheer volume of digital devices around us today. So if you're really expecting your colleagues to be present for what you have to say, we have to demonstrate that we're present for what they have to say. That's why nonverbal cues of active listening, like nodding or smiling, can be so reinforcing for helping others know that you're listening. My final point was going to be not to sleep on the chat window. The chat window can be your friend. I think we're seeing how much active support and resources are being shared here in chat. But using that chat window as your partner, as an opportunity to call and response, to get feedback in real time is so, so helpful. If you take nothing else away from today's conversation, I want to encourage you to stay on the horse, meaning when you dare to make your voice heard, when you dare to try any of these new tactics, it can sometimes feel like you're taking a huge leap of faith. And it's scary, right? It is scary. It can make any one of us just want to give up, let go of the reins and say, I can't do this, and kind of bail. And I've seen a lot of speakers who I work with, I'm talking just everyday professionals who are working on their speaking, get to a point where they just go, can I start over? That kind of giving up feeling of like, this is not going perfectly. I don't want to continue this. Let me start over. There are no do-overs in life, y'all, okay? Whatever happens, no matter how perfectly or imperfectly you use the blade or boardroom chicken or however your words are coming off, I want to encourage you to dig in your heels, to tighten your grip on those reins, and to stay on the horse to see this process through. Because you've got it, you're already on the horse, right? You got to stay on there and give yourself an opportunity to recover a conversation gone awry, not try to redo it, because there really are no redos. So stay on the horse. Don't bail on yourself while you're taking these kinds of risks. And I encourage you to experiment and see it through. These are some of the big takeaways I want to recap as we move into Q&A today. I know that we're here with more resources. Here at Bossed Up, we've got resources like our Speak Up Accelerator or our Hired Job Search Accelerator that we can drop links to in chat as well. But I want you to keep in mind that speaking up in meetings is so important for your career and for the public good. You can interject and hold the floor using the tools that we shared with you today. And I encourage you to experiment and give yourself a little bit of grace as you begin to feel more confident and composed as you put these into practice. Brandy, I'll let you take it away from here before we wrap up. Thank you so much all for being here.
Thanks, Emily. Now let's get to some of those questions. Starting with, how do you avoid talking over each other in a virtual meeting, Emily?
That is a great question, Brandy. I don't think it's something that can be completely avoided, right? We are all perfectly imperfect human beings. And I think if we can extend a little bit of grace to ourselves and others, we can acknowledge that speaking over people happens, and we can give each other the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this person in accounting isn't trying to speak over me for any malicious reasons. Maybe their connection is delayed. And so when those moments happen, it's not about trying to avoid them or apologize for them. It's more about trying to recover from them. If I got interrupted, maybe I can give that person the floor and then come back afterwards to make my point. Or if I keep getting spoken over, maybe I can try some of these tactics like boardroom chicken to just keep speaking and then say, did you want to say something, John? I heard you speak up earlier. I'd love to hand the floor back to you. So it's not one or the other. It can be a collaboration, and we can always make our point a priority and then make sure we're passing the mic to make sure others are heard as well.
That's a great point. It's not just necessarily a one-off situation. If you're meeting with the same people frequently and it becomes a pattern, maybe that's when you start to put some of those other tips into practice. But on a one-off situation, you can, grant the other person a chance to say their piece before you jump back in or anything like that.
Totally.
Next question here, and there's actually two that are somewhat related, so I'll group them together. How does someone undo loss of voice? And then, I have conflict phobia and approval addiction. What is the initial process to overcome this?
Well, first, let me tell you that you are not alone. I work with countless people all the time in our Speak Up program who feel the exact same way. So you're not alone. And in fact, I think the way our education system is designed, it gets us all a little bit addicted to that merit badge chasing behavior or that approval seeking behavior that can be very productive for a student, but not very productive for an advocate or a professional who's trying to advocate for themselves. So let me think of it from a neuroplasticity standpoint, if you'll allow me to geek out with y'all for a second. In our minds, there are well-worn neural pathways that are based upon our past behavior. So in the past, if saying nothing or deferring to our boss has worked well for us, that can become a habitual reflex, a well-traveled neural pathway that becomes almost just a reflex we don't even think about. That's like the mindlessness that we bring to our commute home sometimes. If anyone's ever arrived in their own driveway and thought, how did I even get here? Like, this isn't where I was supposed to be going. We create mindlessness in our own brains because it's part of our learning. It's how our brains are designed to learn. So we don't have to actively think about every single thing we do. Now, if you recognize that that pathway, that default behavior is no longer serving you, it's going to take conscious, active effort to recreate a new connection in your brain, to say, you know what, before my mind goes in that direction by default, this is an opportunity to recognize, I want to try something different here for a minute. Once we recognize, you know what, I'm thinking of that tactic Emily shared on the Indeed Jobcast last week, maybe this is an opportunity to use the blade. Instead of just saying nothing, I'm going to use the blade to speak up and insert myself into this conversation. We can create a new neural connection by changing our behavior first. So taking one small baby step in the direction of the new path that you want to create, and then repeating that behavior as needed literally changes your brain's pathways, changes your connections that you're making, like in response to this threat, I take that action for survival, by essentially saying, I'm going to try something different here by creating a moment of mindful awareness, changing my behavior, and repeating that behavior to this new tactic that I want to make my new neural pathway. That takes time, and it can take a little bit of accountability and reinforcement. And if your workplace doesn't feel like a safe space to try these new skills out for size, guess what? You can go seek out safe environments like professional development opportunities. Here at Indeed, here at Bossed Up, our Speak Up program is designed for that. So practice makes permanent, not perfect. Keep that in mind.
I love that. Another question we have here. I get hushed a lot after 10 to 25 seconds, and they keep talking and claim I'm not allowing others to talk. How can I deal with this politely?
Wow, being hushed literally is not something that I hear about too often. That is patronizing. Unless you're a second grader who's being hushed by your teacher, I think that's worthy of a frank conversation with whomever's doing the hushing. I don't think anyone should be hushed. No adult human being should be hushed in their workplace, literally. I think that's extremely disrespectful. So first and foremost, recognize that that's not okay. And it's well within your rights to have a conversation about it. I think there's some great advice out there that Francesca Ramsey writes about in her book. Her book is called, Well, That Escalated Quickly. And she writes about the difference between calling out and calling in. Kirby and Ellie, we've got a great podcast all about how to call out and call in. And if you want to drop that podcast in chat, this will be a helpful one for you, whomever asked this question. If you are being hushed chronically at work or you're given feedback, whoever's doing that hushing is worth taking aside and calling them in to say, let me talk to you privately, maybe before the next meeting, about how this behavior is making me feel and how this is having a negative outcome on the overall conversations that we're having. And you want to give them the benefit of the doubt again by saying, I'm sure this isn't your intention, but I feel very disrespected when you're hushing me. And I know that we want to have a workplace where everyone feels respected, heard, and like our voices and contributions matter. So I'd appreciate it if this specific behavior was not continued. And giving feedback like that can be very scary, especially if you're giving feedback vertically to someone above you. But it is within your rights, absolutely, to call someone in to create that moment of learning and mindfulness. Calling them out is an option as well, but that's more of a public occasion that can come with more social ramifications because it can make you look like you're shaming that person publicly. You've got to know your own personal risk tolerance here. What are the risks that you face? What are the potential rewards that you face, including self-satisfaction and feeling like you have your own back and respecting yourself, which matters too. And you know what? If it doesn't change, if your feedback is taken negatively, it might be time to vote with your feet, meaning welcome to Indeed.com, the best place on the internet to find your next job.
Love that plug. I know we are at time, but I want to get to this one last question because it's from a different perspective that I think is valuable. I have no problem speaking up in spaces. However, as someone with power in my organization, I've struggled to create spaces for others to speak. We've created meeting agreements, and I pause to wait for others to collect their thoughts, but there's still a lot of silence. What are your thoughts on how to help others collaborate in meeting spaces?
Love this question. There's so much good stuff happening here. First, let me applaud your intent. More bosses need to have this positive intent from the get-go, which is how do I create space and safety for others to make their voices heard? As a very outspoken boss of a team of mostly introverts at Bossed Up, 2 of whom are with me here today, I can tell you I've struggled with this myself because dismantling groupthink when you're the group thinker is a real problem. Here are 3 things that I would recommend embracing. 1 is understanding psychological safety. Psychological safety is something that bosses can create and people in management can create for their teams by design or by default. Psychological safety is the belief that you will not be punished for making a misstep, for speaking up out of turn, that you will not be patronized or shut down or fired for being a fallible human being. And so I would think about, how am I creating psychological safety when people make mistakes? How are they being handled? How are they being talked about? That's really important. In workplaces with no psychological safety, you're not going to get people to take risks. You're not going to get people to stick their neck out no matter what you say. So audit your workplace for psychological safety. 2 is a piece of advice that Simon Sinek, an author, made very popular in a viral video that you can Google anytime, called Why Leaders Need to Learn How to Be the Last to Speak. The next time you're leading a meeting and you want to say, you know what, this plan for marketing is not where it needs to be. What do you think? You've already ruined it. You have to stop yourself from sharing your feedback and pause before you proclaim, here's the solution. What do you think? You have to stop and say, here's the challenge. Here's the problem. I want to hear everyone's ideas on this. Let's go around the table. And then what happens when you go around the table and you hear contributions from everyone is you normalize sharing half-baked ideas, right? This is not share your perfect solution. It's share your idea. You also restrain yourself from casting judgment or weighing in. Even try to resist giving nonverbal approval. And then you have the benefit of hearing what everyone else thinks before you render judgment at the end. So that's a really helpful strategy. And my final piece of advice is passing the mic as an ally. It's one thing to say, what does anyone else think? And to wait, hoping someone speaks up. It's another thing to say, Ellie, you're closest to our Instagram following on this. What would you say here? You're essentially inviting that person by name to contribute, and you're reminding them of why you think they are the most qualified person to weigh in here, giving them a little bit of a confidence boost along the way. So create psychological safety, become the last to speak, and actively invite contributions as an act of allyship. And by allyship, I mean this is especially relevant for inviting in the voices that are underrepresented in your workplace. So thank you for the opportunity to answer that very important question, Brandy.
Absolutely. If you found this to be helpful, check out our other Jobcasts at Indeed.com/Jobcast and follow Indeed on social media. Have a question? Leave it as a video comment for the Indeed team. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more career advice. Thanks for watching.